the house on Independence Avenue. The rain fell like tears from heaven that Thursday evening in Enugu, drumming against the zinc roof of the Okonkwo mansion with a rhythm that sounded almost like a warning. Inside the grand sitting room, with its cream leather sofas and marble floors that gleamed like still water, 16-year-old Adaeze sat painting her fingernails a deep crimson red, each stroke precise and deliberate, while her mother's voice floated from the kitchen like smoke she couldn't be bothered to notice. Adaeze, Biko, come and help me with these vegetables. The girl didn't even lift her head. She blew gently on her wet nails, admiring how the color caught the light from the chandelier above. The chandelier her father had imported all the way from Italy, the one that cost more than most families in their street earned in a year. Adaeze, do you not hear me calling you? Her mother's voice came again, closer now, edged with that familiar mixture of exhaustion and resignation that Adaeze had learned to ignore as easily as breathing. Mama, can't you see I'm busy? Adaeze finally responded, her voice carrying that particular a tone of boredom that only comes from never having wanted for anything in one's entire life. Besides, isn't that why Daddy pays in Ngozi? Let the housemaid do it. That's her job, not mine. Mama Adaeze appeared in the doorway, her wrapper tied loosely around her waist, her blouse stained with palm oil and onion juice. She was a woman who had once been beautiful, still was if you looked past the tiredness in her eyes, the slight stoop in her shoulders that came from carrying burdens too heavy and too long. She looked at her daughter now, this girl she had pushed into the world 17 years ago during a rainstorm not unlike this one, this child who had been her greatest joy and was now becoming her deepest sorrow. Ngozi has gone to the market, Mama said quietly. And even if she was here, is it not good for you to know how to prepare food? What will you do when you marry and go to your husband's house? Adaeze laughed, a sharp cutting sound like glass breaking. Mama, please, when I marry, my husband will be so rich that we will have 10 housemaids, not just one. I won't need to know how to cook anything. She waved her newly painted nails in the air. These hands were not made for peeling yam and grinding pepper. Something flickered in her mother's eyes then, something that might have been pain or might have been memory. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. The rain grew louder, filling the silence between them like an uninvited guest. Your father will soon be home, Mama finally said. He has been working very hard. It would be nice if you could at least greet him properly when he arrives. Adaeze hummed, already turning her attention to her phone, her fingers flying across the screen as she typed messages to her friend, her fellow big girls of Enugu, daughters of politicians and businessmen, girls who wore their parents' wealth like armor and thought it would protect them from everything. Mama stood there for a moment longer, watching her daughter, this stranger who wore her face. Then she turned and walked back to the kitchen, her slippers making soft, sad sounds against the marble floor. What Mama didn't say, what she had never told Adaeze, was that she had once been poor, so poor that she had worn the same dress to school every day for 3 years, so poor that she had sometimes gone to bed hungry so her younger siblings could eat, so poor that when Chief Okonkwo had asked her father for her hand in marriage, her family celebrated for 7 days because it meant one less mouth to feed and a daughter saved from suffering. What Mama didn't say was that she had wanted something different for Adaeze. She had wanted her daughter to have everything she never had, yes, but also to understand the value of what she was given. Somewhere along the line, in giving Adaeze everything, she had given her nothing at all. The rain continued to fall. Chief Bartholomew Okonkwo arrived home at 7:30, just as darkness was settling over Enugu like a thick blanket. He was a large man, not fat but solid, the kind of man whose presence filled the room before he even spoke. His agbada was slightly damp from the rain, and he carried his briefcase in one hand and his phone in the other. Always working, always moving, like a shark that would die if it stopped swimming. "Good evening, Daddy," Adaeze sang out from the sofa, her voice suddenly sweet as honey, suddenly the perfect daughter. "Adaeze, my princess," Chief said, smiling despite his obvious tiredness. He set down his briefcase and opened his arms. Adaeze rose gracefully and went to him, letting him embrace her, breathing in his cologne, expensive, imported like everything else in their lives. "How was school today?"
"Fine, Daddy, very fine." She had actually skipped 2 classes to go shopping with her friends, but she didn't mention that. "Did you study hard?" "Yes, Daddy." She hadn't opened a book in 3 days, but she didn't mention that either. "That's my good girl." Chief reached into his pocket and pulled out a bundle of crisp Naira notes. "Here, buy yourself something nice. You deserve it for working so hard." Adaze's eyes lit up as she took the money. 20,000 Naira. More than some families spent on food in a month. "Thank you, Daddy. You are the best father in the whole world." From the kitchen doorway, Mama watched this exchange with an expression that was hard to read. She had tried many times to tell her husband that he was spoiling Adaeze, that money couldn't replace proper training, that wealth without character was like a house built on sand. But Chief would smile and wave away her concerns. "My dear, I suffered when I was young. I don't want my daughter to suffer the way I did. Let her enjoy her life. What is money for if not to give our children a better life?" But giving a child everything they want and giving them a better life, Mama was beginning to understand, were not the same thing at all. Dinner that night was jollof rice with fried chicken, plantain, and coleslaw. Ngozi had returned from the market and prepared everything perfectly, as she always did. They sat at the big dining table, Chief at the head, Mama to his right, Adaeze to his left, with 3 empty chairs that would never be filled because they had never been blessed with other children. "This chicken is too dry," Adaeze complained, pushing her plate away after 2 bites. "Ngozi, didn't I tell you last week that I like my chicken more moist? Are you deaf or just stupid?" "Adaeze," Mama's voice was sharp, "you will not speak to Ngozi that way." "Why not?" Adaeze challenged, her eyes flashing. "We pay her salary, don't we? She is our maid. If she can't cook properly, she should learn or find another job." Ngozi stood frozen by the kitchen door, her eyes fixed on the floor. She was only 23, a girl from a village in Anambra State, who sent most of her small salary home to help her sick mother. Her hands trembled slightly, but she said nothing. "Apologize to her," Mama said firmly. "For what? For telling the truth?" "Adaeze, leave it, my dear," Chief interrupted, his voice tired. "Let's just eat in peace. Ngozi, the food is fine. You can go."
Ngozi nodded and disappeared into the kitchen, grateful to escape. Mama stared at her husband in disbelief, then at her daughter, who had already picked up her phone and was scrolling through Instagram, smiling at pictures of her friends' designer bags and foreign vacations. The rain had stopped, but the silence at the table was louder than any storm. It was on a bright Saturday morning, 3 weeks later, when the first crack appeared in Adaeze's perfect world. She was at the Palms shopping mall with her 3 closest friends, Chiamaka, Nneka, and Zainab, all of them dressed in expensive jeans and designer tops, all of them carrying their father's credit cards like weapons. They moved through the mall like a small army, trying on clothes they didn't need, buying things they would use once and forget, laughing loudly at jokes that weren't funny. "Adaeze, come and see this bag," Chiamaka called from inside a boutique. "It's the new Gucci. It just came in this morning." Adaeze rushed over, her heart already racing with the thrill of acquisition. The bag was beautiful. Cream leather with gold hardware, the kind of bag that announced your worth before you even opened your mouth. "How much is it?" she asked the salesgirl, a thin young woman who looked at them with a mixture of hope and envy. 150,000 Naira, ma. Adaeze didn't even blink. She pulled out her father's credit card, the one he had given her for emergencies, and handed it over. "I'll take it." But when the salesgirl swiped the card, something strange happened. The machine beeped once, twice, then flashed a red light. "I'm sorry, ma," the salesgirl said nervously. "The card has been declined." "That's impossible," Adaeze snapped. "Try it again." The girl tried again, same result. Red light, declined. "There must be something wrong with your machine," Adaeze said, her voice rising, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment as her friends gathered around to watch. "My father is Chief Adaeze Okonkwo. Do you know who he is? This card has never been declined in my life." "I'm sorry, ma, but let me speak to your manager." The manager came, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes who tried the card again on a different machine. Same result. "I'm very sorry, ma, but this card has been blocked. Perhaps you should call your bank."
Adaeze's hands were shaking as she snatched the card back. Behind her, she could hear Chiamaka and Neka whispering to each other, could feel their eyes on her back like tiny needles. Zainab had already moved to another section of the store, suddenly very interested in a display of scarves. "Forget this cheap bag anyway," Adaeze said loudly, her voice brittle as dried leaves. "I saw a better one at another store. Let's go." But as they left the boutique, she caught sight of their reflections in the glass door. 4 girls in expensive clothes, but she could have sworn that for just a moment, she looked different from the others, smaller somehow, less certain. She called her father's phone immediately. It rang once, twice, 3 times, then went to voicemail. She called again, same thing. She tried texting him. "Daddy, your credit card isn't working. I need money. Please call me back ASAP." No response. She tried to push down the small flutter of anxiety in her chest. It was nothing, she told herself, just a technical problem. Her father would fix it. He always fixed everything. But he didn't call her back that day, or the next day, or the day after that. When Adaeze arrived home from the mall that Saturday, the house felt different. She couldn't quite explain it, but something had shifted in the air, like the atmospheric pressure before a thunderstorm. Her father's car was in the driveway, which was strange because he usually walked on Saturdays. She found him in his study, sitting at his big mahogany desk with his head in his hands, surrounded by papers that looked like bills and letters with red stamps on them. "Daddy," she knocked softly on the open door. "Your credit card wasn't working today. I couldn't buy—" "Not now, Adaeze." His voice was flat, empty of its usual warmth. "But Daddy, I said not now." He looked up at her then, and she took a step back. She had never seen her father look like this, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow, his face grey with a kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't cure, his shoulders hunched as if under an invisible weight. Is everything okay?" For a moment, he just stared at her, and she couldn't read his expression. Then he laughed, a terrible sound, nothing like his usual booming laughter. "Is everything okay? Is everything okay?" He swept his arm across the desk, sending papers flying. "No, Adaeze, everything is not okay. Everything is very, very far from okay." Mama appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "Bartholomew, please. The child doesn't understand." "Then maybe it's time she understood." He stood up so suddenly that his chair fell backward with a crash. "Maybe it's time she understood that money doesn't grow on trees, that credit cards are not magic, that her father is not invincible." Adaeze felt tears pricking at her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Daddy, you're scaring me." He looked at her for a long moment, and then as quickly as it had come, the anger drained out of him. He sat down on the edge of his desk, suddenly looking old, defeated. "I'm sorry, my princess. I'm sorry. It's just, things are difficult right now. Very difficult." "What kind of things?"
He exchanged a glance with Mama, who nodded slightly. The business is having problems, he said finally. Big problems. Some of our major contracts fell through. We lost a lot of money, and there are some investigations. Government people asking questions about things, looking into our accounts. Adaeze didn't fully understand what this meant, but she understood enough to feel afraid. But you'll fix it, right? You always fix everything. He smiled, but it was the saddest smile she had ever seen. I'm trying, my dear. I'm trying. That night, Adaeze lay in her bed, her big, soft bed with its silk sheets and too many pillows, and listened to her parents arguing in their room down the hall. She couldn't make out all the words, but she caught fragments. Tell her the truth. Not yet. She's too young. Too late for that. Everything we've built. She pulled her blanket over her head and tried to remember when things had last felt normal, safe, certain. But like trying to hold water in your hands, the memory kept slipping away. The changes came slowly at first, then all at once, like the way night falls in the tropics. Gradual, then suddenly dark. First, Ngozi stopped coming to work. Adaeze asked about her once, and Mama simply said, "We can't afford to pay her anymore," in a voice that discouraged further questions. Then the generator disappeared from the compound, sold to pay some bill or another. When power went out now, they sat in darkness and heat, swatting mosquitoes and waiting for NEPA to bring the light back. The cable TV subscription lapsed. Then the internet. Adaze's phone, the latest iPhone, her pride and joy, was downgraded to a small Nokia that could only make calls and send text messages. "But how will I stay in touch with my friends?" she cried. "You can call them," Mama said simply. "That's how we communicated when I was your age." Her friends, that was another change. At school, Chiamaka and Neka and Zenag had started sitting at a different table during lunch. They didn't call her anymore, didn't invite her to go shopping or to parties. When she approached them in the corridor, they greeted her with smiles that didn't reach their eyes and excuses about being busy. One day, she overheard Chiamaka talking to a group of junior girls. "Adaeze Okonkwo, oh, her family is finished. My daddy said her father is under investigation for fraud. They are going to lose everything. Can you imagine? She used to be so proud. And now," laughter, cruel as broken glass. Adaeze ran to the bathroom and locked herself in a stall, her whole body shaking. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't real. Any moment now, she would wake up and find that her life was back to normal, that she was still the Adaeze Okonkwo everyone envied and admired. Not this girl whose friends abandoned her, whose clothes were starting to look worn, whose father came home later and later each night with newer and deeper lines carved into his face. But she didn't wake up because she wasn't dreaming. The real end came on a Tuesday morning in November. Adaeze woke to the sound of loud voices and heavy footsteps. She stumbled out of her room, still in her nightgown, to find strange men in dark suits walking through their house, carrying clipboards and putting stickers on everything: the leather sofas, the dining table, the big screen TV, the chandelier, even the paintings on the walls. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice small and frightened. Her father was standing in the middle of the sitting room in his pajamas, looking like a man who had been stripped of everything but his skin. A short, officious-looking man with glasses was reading from a document in a bored monotone.
By order of the Federal High Court, all assets belonging to Chief Bartholomew Okonkwo are hereby seized, pending the outcome of the fraud investigation and the settlement of outstanding debts totaling 47 million naira. "Fraud?" Adaeze whispered. "Daddy, what is he talking about?" But her father didn't answer. He couldn't seem to look at her. Mama appeared beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Come, Adaeze, let's go pack your things." "Pack? Where are we going?" "Away from here." Mama's voice was steady, but her eyes were wet. "This house no longer belongs to us." It took 3 hours for the men to finish their inventory and label everything in the house that would be sold to pay her father's debts. During that time, Adaeze and her mother were allowed to pack 2 suitcases each, just 2 suitcases to hold the remains of their former lives. Adaeze stood in her bedroom, looking at her wardrobe full of clothes, her shelves full of shoes and bags, her dressing table covered with makeup and perfumes and jewelry. How could she fit any of this into 2 suitcases? What should she take? What should she leave behind? In the end, crying so hard she could barely see, she packed practical things: a few changes of clothes, her school uniform, her textbooks, one photograph of her family taken during happier times. The designer bags, the expensive shoes, the jewelry, she left them all behind, watching through tears as the men put stickers on them too. As they walked out of the house that had been her whole world, Adaeze turned back one last time. She wanted to memorize it: the tall iron gates, the marble fountain in the compound, the perfectly manicured lawn, the house itself, massive and imposing with its cream paint and dark roof. A small crowd had gathered outside the gate to watch: neighbors, passers-by, people who had once smiled at her and called her chief's daughter, now whispering behind their hands, their eyes bright with the kind of curiosity people have for other people's misfortunes. Adaeze recognized one woman in the crowd, Mrs. Udoka from 3 houses down, whose daughter Chioma had always envied Adaeze's clothes and gadgets. Mrs. Udoka was saying to someone, loud enough for Adaeze to hear, "Pride comes before a fall. That girl was too proud, too spoilt. Maybe this will teach her some sense." Adaeze felt something break inside her chest, something that might have been her heart, or might have been her pride, or might have been both at once. They got into a taxi, not their Mercedes, which had been seized along with everything else, but a battered yellow taxi that smelt of sweat and exhaust fumes. The driver kept looking at Chief Okonkwo in the rearview mirror with recognition and pity. "Where to?" he asked. Chief gave him an address in Trans-Ekulu, one of the older, poorer parts of Enugu, where houses were small and cramped together, where streets were narrow and unpaved, where Adaeze had never been in her entire life. As the taxi pulled away from Independence Avenue, from the mansion and the life she had known, Adaeze pressed her face against the window and watched her world shrink and disappear behind them. She didn't know yet what lay ahead. She didn't know that they were going to her mother's old family house, a small 2-bedroom bungalow where her grandmother still lived. She didn't know that her father would leave them there and disappear for 3 days to sort things out. She didn't know that she would have to change schools, that she would have to learn to wash clothes by hand, that she would have to fetch water from a well, that she would have to share a room with her mother and sleep on a mat on the floor. She didn't know any of these things yet. All she knew was that the girl who had left that house was not the same girl sitting in this taxi. Something had ended. Something else, terrifying and unknown, was beginning. And in the distance, thunder rumbled, promising another storm. The house in Trans-Ekulu was everything the mansion on Independence Avenue was not. It was small, so small that Adaeze thought at first that they had stopped at the gatehouse by mistake. The paint was peeling, revealing patches of grey cement underneath like wounds that had never healed. The roof was rusty zinc that rattled when the wind blew. There was no gate, just a low fence made of cement blocks, and the compound was bare red earth, not grass, swept clean with a broom from palm fronds. Standing in the doorway was an old woman, thin as a whisper, her hair completely white, her face a map of wrinkles that told stories Adaeze had never bothered to learn. This was Mama Nuku, her grandmother, her mother's mother, a woman Adaeze had met perhaps 5 times in her entire life because Daddy prefers we celebrate holidays at the hotel, and Trans-Ekulu is so far, and a dozen other excuses that now tasted like ash in her mouth. "Nemi," Mama said, falling to her knees in the traditional greeting of respect. "We have come home." Mama Nuku looked at them for a long moment, at her daughter kneeling in the dust, at Chief Okonkwo standing apart with his eyes fixed on the ground, at Adaeze hovering uncertainly with her suitcases, this granddaughter who had been too important to visit, too busy to call, too wrapped up in her own perfect life to remember where she came from. Then the old woman's face softened and she opened her arms. "Come," she said simply. "Come inside. You are home."
That first night in the small house was the longest of Adaeze's life. The sitting room was barely large enough for the old sofa and the 2 wooden chairs. The walls were bare except for a fading photograph of Mama Nuku's late husband and a picture of Jesus with a bleeding heart. There was no TV, no air conditioning, no soft carpets, just rough cement floors that were cold beneath Adaeze's feet. Dinner was gari and egusi soup prepared by Mama Nuku on a small kerosene stove. They ate from plastic plates, not fine china. They drank water from a clay pot, not bottled water from the refrigerator. The soup was good, better than good actually, but Adaeze could barely swallow past the lump in her throat. After dinner, her father stood up. "I have to go," he said, not meeting anyone's eyes. "I have to meet some people, try to sort out this mess." "When will you come back?" Adaeze asked, hating how small her voice sounded. "Soon," he said, but they all heard the lie in it. He left and they didn't see him again for 3 days. That night, Adaeze lay on a thin mat on the floor of the small bedroom she now shared with her mother, staring up at the ceiling where a gecko was hunting mosquitoes. Through the thin walls, she could hear neighbors talking and laughing, could smell someone's dinner cooking, could hear a baby crying and a woman singing a lullaby in Igbo. "Mama," she whispered into the darkness, "how long do we have to stay here?" Her mother was quiet for so long that Adaeze thought she had fallen asleep. Then, "I don't know, my daughter. I don't know. I hate this. I hate everything about this. I know. Why did this happen to us? What did we do to deserve this?" Another long silence. Then Mama said, very softly, "Maybe the question is not what we did to deserve this, but what we did with what we had before." Adaeze wanted to ask what she meant, but sleep came suddenly, pulling her down into dreams of marble floors that cracked beneath her feet and chandeliers that shattered like stars falling from heaven. The next morning, Adaeze woke to the sound of a cock crowing and morning sun streaming through a window that had no curtains. Mama Anoku was already awake, sweeping the compound with a broom made of stiff grass. She looked up as Adaeze emerged, stretching and yawning. "Good morning, Grandma," Adaeze mumbled. "Adaeze," the old woman said, her voice sharp as a knife. "In this house, we greet properly. Kneel down and greet me as you were taught." Adaeze felt her face grow hot. Kneel? In the dirt? But the look in her grandmother's eyes left no room for argument. Slowly, feeling humiliated and angry, she knelt in the red earth and said, "Good morning, Mama Onuku." "Better. Now go and fetch water from the well. We need to bathe and cook." "Fetch water? From a well?" Adaeze stared at her grandmother in disbelief. "I don't know how to do that." "Then you will learn. Your mother will show you." Mama Anoku went back to her sweeping, the conversation clearly over. Adaeze found her mother in the small kitchen, a room barely bigger than a bathroom stall with a kerosene stove and a few blackened pots. "Mama, she wants me to fetch water. I can't do that. I don't even know how." Her mother turned to look at her, and Adaeze was startled by the expression on her face. Not sympathy, not the indulgence she was used to, but something harder, sadder, more resolved. "Then I will teach you, the same way my mother taught me when I was younger than you are now." They walked to the well at the end of the street, Mama carrying a yellow jerry can on her head, moving with the easy grace of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Adaeze stumbled along beside her, aware of curious eyes watching from doorways and windows, aware of children pausing their play to stare at her, aware of her own uselessness, her own helplessness, her own shame. At the well, there were already several women and girls gathered, lowering buckets on long ropes, pulling them up heavy with water,
pouring it into containers balanced on their heads with casual expertise that seemed like magic to Adaeze. One of the girls, about Adaeze's age, looked at her and smiled. "Are you the new girl? Mama Anuku's granddaughter?" "Yes," Adaeze said quietly. "I am Obioma. I live 3 houses away. Welcome to Trans-Ekulu." She said it without mockery, without pity, just a simple statement of fact. Mama showed Adaeze how to lower the bucket, how to pull it up, harder than it looked. The rope burned her soft hands and the bucket was so heavy she nearly dropped it, and pouring it into the jerry can without spilling half of it on the ground. "Now," Mama said, "put it on your head." "What? No, I can't. I'll carry it in my hands." "It's too heavy to carry in your hands all the way back. On your head, the weight is distributed better." "But Mama..." "Adaeze," her mother's voice was firm. "You have a choice. You can cry and complain about what you cannot do, or you can learn to do what you must do. Which will it be?" Adaeze felt her face grow hot, but she blinked them back. She had cried so much in the past few days that she was tired of crying, tired of being weak, tired of being useless. "Teach me," she whispered. It took 45 minutes to walk back to the house, with the jerry can wobbling on Adaeze's head, her mother walking beside her with a steadying hand, water sloshing over the rim and soaking her dress, her neck aching, her legs trembling. When they finally reached the house, Adaeze's whole body was shaking with exhaustion. "Good," Mama Anuku said, as if Adaeze had accomplished something remarkable instead of just carrying water like millions of people did every day. "You are learning."
The days began to blur together, each one teaching Adaeze something new about survival, about humility, about the vast distance between the person she had been and the person she was becoming. She learned to wash clothes by hand, scrubbing them against a stone until her knuckles bled. She learned to cook on the kerosene stove, to blow gently on the flames to keep them alive, to stir soup without burning it. She learned to sweep the compound every morning, to know the difference between different types of brooms, to take pride in a job well done, even when the job was simple. She learned the names of her neighbors: Mama Chidi, who sold vegetables by the roadside; Papa Emeka, who repaired shoes under a tree; Obioma and her 6 siblings who lived in a house even smaller than Mama Nuku's; Chinonso, the boy with 1 leg, who nevertheless smiled more than anyone Adaeze had ever met. She learned that people could be happy without money, could be generous when they had almost nothing, could find joy in small things: a good meal, a funny story, a cool evening breeze, a child's laughter. She learned that Ngozi, their former housemaid, had come from a place even poorer than this, that the small salary they had paid her was all that stood between her family and starvation, that Adaeze's casual cruelty to her had been more than just rudeness, it had been a kind of violence. And slowly, painfully, like a bone setting after a break, she began to learn who she really was when everything else was stripped away. Her father came back after 3 days, then left again, came back for 2 days, left for a week. Each time he returned, he was thinner, older, more distant, like a photograph fading in the sun. "The investigations are ongoing," he would say. "The lawyers are working on it. I'm trying to get some of our money back, trying to start again." But his eyes told a different story, a story of doors slammed in his face, of friends who no longer answered his calls, of the brutal speed with which the world forgets yesterday's big men. One evening, about 6 weeks after they had moved to Trans-Ekulu, he came back with news. "I found a school that will take Adaeze," he said. "Community secondary school, about 2 kilometers from here. It's not like her old school, but it's something." Not like her old school was perhaps the greatest understatement Adaeze had ever heard. Holy Rosary Secondary School, where she had studied before, was private, expensive, with air-conditioned classrooms and computer labs and a swimming pool, and teachers who were well-paid and well-trained. Community Secondary School was a government school with overcrowded classrooms and broken desks, and teachers who sometimes didn't show up because their salaries were months late. On her first day, wearing a uniform that Mama Nuku had sewn by hand because they couldn't afford to buy a new one, Adaeze walked through the gates of community secondary school feeling like she was walking into a nightmare. The students stared at her, this newcomer with her light skin. She had always used expensive bleaching creams. Now her natural color was returning, and her uncertain steps and her eyes that couldn't quite hide her fear and her disdain. She was assigned to SS2B, a class of 53 students in a room meant for 30. The teacher, Mr. Okafor, introduced her briefly. This is Adaeze Okonkwo. She will be joining us from today. No mention of her father's wealth, his fall from grace, the scandal. But everyone knew. In Enugu, everyone always knew everything. During break time, she sat alone under a tree, trying to be invisible. A group of girls approached her, not the friendly, designer-wearing girls of her old life, but tough-looking girls with hard eyes and suspicious faces. "So you are the chief's daughter, the one who used to be rich," one of them said. Adaeze didn't answer, just stared at the ground. "My sister worked as a sales girl at that boutique where you used to shop," another girl said. "She said you are always so rude, so proud. You treated people like dirt." Still, Adaeze said nothing. What could she say? It was all true. "Now, look at you. Not so fine anymore, eh? Not so proud?" The first girl continued. Adaeze felt something rising in her chest. Anger, shame, something that might have been the old Adaeze ready to fight, ready to say something cutting and cruel. But then she remembered her grandmother's words that morning. "Pride is like a balloon, my child. The more you fill it with air, the bigger it gets until one day, pop, it bursts and there is nothing left but broken pieces." She looked up at the girls and said quietly, "You're right. I was proud. I was rude. I treated people badly. I'm sorry." The girls stared at her, clearly not expecting this. Then one of them, a girl named Adaora with kind eyes, said, Come and sit with us. Let me show you around the school." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. 3 months passed, then 6, then almost a year. Adaze's life became a routine of early mornings and hard work, of school and chores and studying by candlelight when there was no electricity, of slowly, painfully learning to find contentment in small victories, a good grade on a test, a meal well cooked, clothes washed clean, a neighbor's smile, a friend's laughter. Her father's case dragged on. Some of the charges were dropped, others stuck. Some of their property was returned, most was lost. He was not going to prison, the lawyer said, but he would never be Chief Bartholomew Okonkwo, big man, again. He would have to start from the bottom, rebuild from nothing. He got a job, a clerk's position in a small company, earning in a month what he used to spend in a day. Adaeze watched him leave for work in the mornings. This man who had once been driven everywhere in a Mercedes, now taking public transport, crowded danfos and okadas, arriving home tired and dusty and diminished. But also, strangely, more present, more real, more like a father and less like a distant god who showed love through money. One evening, he sat with Adaeze in the small compound while Mama and Mama Nuku cooked dinner inside. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly. Adaeze looked up from her homework, surprised. "For what, Daddy?" "For spoiling you. For thinking that giving you money was the same as giving you love. For not teaching you what really matters." He paused, then said, "Your grandmother asked me something the other day. She said, if someone took away everything you owned, would you still know who you are?" I realized I didn't know how to answer that question, and I had raised you the same way. "Daddy, let me finish." He took her hand, his calloused palm. When had his hands become calloused? Warm against hers. You were spoiled and proud, yes, but that was my fault more than yours. I made you that way. And now, seeing you here, seeing how you've changed, how you've learned to work, to be humble, to treat people with respect, I'm proud of you. More proud than I ever was when you were just spending my money." Adaeze felt tears streaming down her face, but for the first time in a long time, they weren't tears of shame or grief. They were something else, something that felt almost like relief. "I didn't think I could survive this," she whispered. "When we first came here, I wanted to die. I thought I would die without my phone, without my clothes, without all the things that made me special. And now?" Now, she looked around at the small compound, at her grandmother's house with its peeling paint and rusty roof, at her mother visible through the window, laughing at something Mama Nuku was saying, at her father sitting beside her in the fading light. Now, I think maybe those things never made me special at all. Maybe they just made me blind. 2 years later, Adaeze graduated from community secondary school with distinction. She had worked harder than she ever had in her life, studying by candlelight and lamplight, determined to prove, not to her old friends or her old life, but to herself, that she was more than what she had once been. Her father's business slowly rebuilt itself, not to its former heights, but to something stable, sustainable. They were able to move out of Mama Nuku's house to a small flat of their own, modest but comfortable. They had electricity most of the time, running water, enough food. They were not rich, but they were not poor either. They were, Adaeze realized, simply ordinary. And there was a kind of freedom in that. On the day of her graduation, as she stood in front of her classmates to give the valedictory speech, Adaeze looked out at the sea of faces, teachers who had believed in her, students who had become true friends, her parents sitting in the front row with tears in their eyes, her grandmother beside them, beaming with pride. She took a deep breath and began to speak. "When I first came to this school, I thought my life was over. I had lost everything that I thought made me valuable, my wealth, my status, my comfort. I was angry at God, at my parents, at the world. I thought I was being punished. But I was wrong. I wasn't being punished. I was being taught. I was taught that a person's value has nothing to do with their bank account. I was taught that pride is a poison that blinds us to what really matters. I was taught that the people we look down on are often the ones who have the most to teach us. I was taught that humility is not weakness, it's wisdom. Most importantly, I was taught that who you are when you have everything is not as important as who you are when you have nothing. Because when everything else is stripped away, the money, the status, the material things, what's left is your true self. And if that self is hollow, if it's built only on pride and possessions, then you have nothing at all. My grandmother has a saying, "A tree that grows in the shade will fall when the sun comes out." I was a tree that grew in the shade of my father's wealth, never developing strong roots of my own. When that wealth was gone, I nearly fell. But instead, I learned to grow again, this time in the full sun, with my own roots dug deep into the soil of hard work, humility, and genuine human connection. To my fellow graduates, as we go out into the world, we will face many challenges. Some of us will become wealthy, some will struggle. But I want to tell you that wealth and poverty are both temporary states. What lasts is character. What lasts is how you treat people. What lasts is whether you learned, when life knocked you down, to get back up with grace and gratitude. And to anyone listening who might be going through difficult times, who might have lost everything they thought mattered, don't give up. You are not your possessions. You are not your circumstances. You are what you choose to become when everything else is taken away. And that,
nobody can take from you. The applause that followed was thunderous. After the ceremony, as Adaeze stood with her family taking photographs, she saw a familiar figure hovering at the edge of the crowd. It was Ngozi, their former housemaid, looking uncertain whether she should approach. Adaeze walked over to her immediately. "Ngozi, you came. I saw the announcement in the paper. I wanted to congratulate you. You did very well." Ngozi's eyes were wary, remembering, perhaps, the girl who had called her stupid, who had treated her like she was less than human. "Ngozi, I need to tell you something. I need to apologize. I was terrible to you, cruel and disrespectful. You worked so hard for our family, and I treated you like you were nothing. I'm so sorry. I can't take back what I did, but I want you to know that I'm ashamed of how I behaved, and if I could go back and change it, I would." Ngozi's eyes filled with tears. "You are just a child. You didn't know. I was old enough to know better, and if I didn't, that's because I chose not to see you as a full person, as someone deserving of respect and kindness. That was wrong. Please forgive me." Ngozi squeezed her hands. "I forgive you, and I'm proud of the woman you are becoming." As the sun set over Enugu that evening, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Adaeze stood in the small compound of their flat, looking up at the stars just beginning to appear. Thought about the girl she had been, spoiled, proud, blind to everything that really mattered. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, painful, humiliating, but ultimately necessary. She was not grateful for her father's fall from grace. She would not wish that kind of suffering on anyone, but she was grateful for what it had taught her, for the person it had forced her to become. Her mother came out and stood beside her, putting an arm around her shoulders. "Are you happy, my daughter?" Adaeze thought about it. Was she happy? She didn't have a fraction of what she used to have. Her clothes were simple, her phone was basic, her future was uncertain. She would have to work hard for everything she wanted, would have to earn what she had once simply been given. But she had real friends now. She had a relationship with her family that went deeper than money. She had learned skills that would serve her all her life. She had discovered that she was strong, capable, resilient in ways she had never known. She had found herself beneath all the layers of privilege and pride. "Yes, Mama," she said softly. "Yes, I am happy." And she meant it. The story of Adaeze Okonkwo teaches us profound truths that echo through every generation. Pride comes before a fall. When we build our identity on temporary things, wealth, status, possessions, we build on sand. True worth comes from character, from how we treat others, from who we are when nobody is watching and when we have nothing to prove. Humility is not humiliation. Learning to serve, to work with our hands, to respect every person regardless of their station, this is not a lowering of ourselves, but an elevation of our humanity. Our hardest seasons can be our greatest teachers. Adaeze lost everything she thought mattered, but in losing it, she found what actually mattered: her strength, her character, her capacity for growth and change. How we treat people when we have power reveals our true character. Adaeze was cruel to Ngozi not because Ngozi deserved it, but because Adaeze had never learned that every person carries infinite worth regardless of their economic status. Money is a terrible foundation for identity. When Chief Okonkwo's wealth disappeared, his daughter nearly crumbled because she had never learned who she was beyond being the rich man's daughter. Our children need to know their value comes from within, not from what we can give them. Suffering can be redemptive. Not all suffering is good, but when we face it with openness and humility, it can transform us in ways that comfort never could. Parents, this story is a mirror. Look into it honestly. Are we raising children with character or just children with possessions? Are we teaching them to serve or only to be served? Are we preparing them for a world that will not always give them what they want? Young people, you are not your parents' money. You are not your designer clothes or your latest phone. You are your choices, your character, your capacity for kindness and resilience. build yourself on a foundation that cannot be shaken. Everyone, the Adaezes of this world, are all around us, in our schools, our churches, our neighborhoods. They are learning through pain lessons they should have been taught with love. Let us be patient with them. Let us be firm but compassionate. Let us remember that we too have been proud and had to learn humility. And let us never forget, a person's true worth is revealed not in what they have, but in who they are when everything is taken away. But the story isn't over. What happened to Chief Okonkwo? Did he ever fully rebuild his business, or did he learn to find meaning in a simpler life? What about Ngozi? Did they remain in contact? Did Adaeze ever find a way to truly make amends for the cruelty of her past? And Adaeze herself, what happened when she went to university? Did she face more challenges from people who knew her story? Did she find love with someone who knew her for who she truly was, not who she had been? What about Chiamaka and the other fair-weather friends? Did any of them ever face their own fall from grace? Did they learn the lessons Adaeze learned, or are they still measuring their worth by the balance in their father's bank account? And perhaps most importantly, what happened when Adaeze, years later, had children of her own? How did she raise them, knowing what she knew about the dangers of spoiling a child? How did she balance giving them a good life with teaching them the values she had learned the hard way? Your turn to help spread this message. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think about your own life or the lives of your children, if it reminded you of someone who needs to hear this message, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video to help it reach more people who need this lesson. Comment below and tell us what part of Adaeze's story resonated most with you. Have you ever experienced a fall from pride to humility? What lessons are you teaching your children about wealth and character? Do you know someone who needs to hear this story? Share this video with parents who are raising children in privilege, young people who might be walking Adaeze's path, anyone who has lost everything and needs hope, churches, schools, and community groups that teach values. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss part 2, where we'll see what becomes of Adaeze as an adult, whether she breaks the cycle or repeats the mistakes of the past, and how the lessons she learned shaped the rest of her life. Remember, every share could change someone's life. Every comment could start an important conversation. Every like helps this message reach one more family that needs to hear it. The question is not whether this story matters. The question is whether you will help it reach the people who need it most. Comment part 2 below if you want us to continue Adaeze's journey. And tell us, what lesson from this story will you carry with you? What will you change in your own life? Let's build a community that values character over possessions, humility over pride, and inner strength over outer appearances. Your story might be different from Adaeze's, but the lessons are universal. Don't just watch, engage. Don't just learn, share. Don't just be moved, take action. Because somewhere out there, there's another Adaeze who hasn't fallen yet, but could if no one teaches her better. And somewhere else, there's an Adaeze who has already fallen and needs to know that her story isn't over, that transformation is possible, that shame can become strength. Be the person who helps this message reach them. Below, like, comment, share, subscribe. The story continues, but only if you help it spread. Pride is like a balloon. The more you fill it with air, the bigger it gets, until one day it bursts and there is nothing left but broken pieces. But humility is like a seed. The deeper you plant it, the stronger the tree that grows. Mama Nukun.